Good afternoon and welcome. I am your host, Catherine McCord. This is our pre-season opener to Career Launch Live, which is back tomorrow at 10 a.m. And I would like to welcome a very special guest, Mr. Myles Wallace. Hi, Myles.
Hello, hello, Catherine. How's it going?
It's going very lovely. Thank you. And please tell the audience a little bit about you and what it is that we will be talking about today.
Of course. My name is Myles Wallace, and I work for Peak Performers. My role is a strategic partnership specialist. So basically, my role is to connect people to peak performers, whether those are job seekers looking for jobs, community partners that work with us to help people with disabilities find jobs, or if it's clients that are also looking to hire great talent as well. My goal is to connect them into peak performers and make that a really smooth and streamlined process for them and kind of help maintain the relationship along the way. Peak Performers, if you've never heard of us before, we are a very unique nonprofit staffing agency. We've been in business for the last 28 years, helping people get jobs. And last year, we put about 850 people to work. And most of those people were placed into positions like administrative, clerical, data entry for some of our folks seeking their very first job, or for people that are transitioning out of maybe a more labor intensive kind of role and looking for something that's more of an in-office experience. But we also do a lot of like program specialists, accountants, attorneys, auditors. Right now I'm looking for a microbiologist. We've looked for epidemiologists. We look for IT people on occasion too. So it's really any kind of professional and office person that you would find in that kind of sphere. Engineering too, and our core business is here in the state of Texas, here in Austin.
You nearly said state of Austin, and that's hilarious to me because it almost feels like
I corrected myself though. I got to watch myself. We do a lot of work with the state of Texas government. They'd have opinions on that. So no, actually, our core. Our core business is with the state of Texas government. But basically, a couple years ago, we were like, why is it that we're only offering our services to the state of Texas government? We could be helping way more people than that. And so that's what we decided to do, is we decided to branch out. And now we're working with not only the state of Texas government, but also a variety of different companies across the entire United States that are passionate about hiring people with disabilities. By the way, our mission is to change the world one job at a time. And I'm very serious about that. I know it sounds corny, but believe me, it's something that I very much believe in.
And you hit on my favorite part about your business, which is that you focus on helping people with disabilities. Now, not only people with disabilities, but people with disabilities, various diagnoses, things like that. So my neurodiverse folks, this is your guy. I've been telling you, I know the people. this is your guy right here. And you do specialize, which I think is wonderful because a lot of people with neurodiversities, despite the fact that they actually make superb workers, which Hewlett Packard has released studies about that, as well as several other organizations, they actually really struggle to find work. And part of that is that their interview style is not always traditional in what we've been taught it ought to be, but they are effective interviewers though, by the way. Typically they tend to be.
I think it depends on the day for them, and I think it depends on the day for me, to be honest with you.
Right.
Yeah, we are very passionate about hiring neurodiverse candidates. We're passionate about hiring people with physical disabilities, people with emotional disabilities, people that might be missing an arm, or people that any number of conditions that affect one or more major life function. We consider all of it for employment, and 85% of the folks that we put to work last year had a disability. I would point out that actually 90% of them had an invisible condition. So the biggest thing that I tell everybody is they might say, oh, I don't really know anybody with a disability. And I go, I bet
yes, you do.
I bet
yes, you do. You just don't know it. It's so funny. I love that you brought that up. So disability, there's actually 3 different types of disabilities. I talk about this a lot. So we have legal, right, which is here in the United States, that's under American Disabilities Act. We have medical, which is when medical teams decide that you have a disability / your diagnosis. And then we have social. And social can be very dangerous because a lot of times that's based on bias and projection, not so much the individual themselves and what's actually going on with them. And disability is not a bad word, by the way. And disability does not mean incapable or a deficit. I have technically 6 disabilities. all of which are invisible. And I travel over the world and talk and work and all of that. So it does not mean that you cannot do things or that you are incapable. So on that front, what are some of your experiences? I mean, you're like me, you work with a lot of people in this community as well. What are some of your experiences with folks along those lines? So what do you see? Do you see that it is in fact a deficit, or do you see that there are people that are very capable?
I would say that the one underlying foundation to all of this is that they're just people like anybody else in the world. And I like to tell companies, I like to tell them, don't ask yourself what jobs do I have for people with disabilities. Just ask yourself, what jobs do I have? And the other kind of key bit of like very cursory feedback that I give them is I like to recommend that you consider first their ability and look at their disability second. Think of it as they've been defined their entire life oftentimes by what they can't do, when that's only a very small piece of their human puzzle. The vast majority of the time, they are able to do most everything that you would need them to do. So look at what they can do, because that's what any of us want, right?
Right. And that's true really of any job candidate anyway, is there's always things you can't do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, nobody can do everything. You know, I pretend I can, but I can't. and, and nobody can do everything. And so it's no different than with any other hire, right? That's what I always try to communicate as well to people, is it's no different from that standpoint. The difference is a lot of times, like I said, your expectations and the interview process and that type of thing, and learning what true inclusion means, which is understanding different communication styles, understanding that blunt is not rude, understanding that somebody, you know, with ADHD may want to sit on a yoga ball or use fidgets or have different kind of grounding tools, as well as other people throughout neurodiversity. But and that's an acceptable way to work. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no reason in the world why you can't work that way. I think that's really important. And I think a lot of companies miss that this is just about just kind of reframing slightly how you're thinking, because our thinking has been flawed. I was taught wrong originally.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean,
about
I
all
don't know
this,
about
all
you,
these
but I
things.
was taught it from a very young age that if somebody's not making eye contact with you while they're
That's
talking to you,
rude.
they're untrustworthy, you know?
Yeah, they're
Oh my
no,
God,
that's
right?
not true at all. It
It's
has nothing to do with it.
there's all kinds of biases that seep in, and we all have
Mm-hmm.
biases. I think that it's important to
Yes.
acknowledge that, and it's also important
Yes.
to acknowledge that having biases does not make us a bad person, right?
No.
It's something that we all have things that we can work on. And you know, I actually about 4 years into working for Peak Performers, I actually took an implicit bias test through the Harvard Business Review. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to take one of these, but basically it asks you a series of rapid questions as quickly as it can, and you're supposed to answer very quickly. And it's supposed to look at that thing called implicit bias, or like,
Mm-hmm.
what's your gut happening? And I found out that I myself actually had an implicit bias towards able-bodied people, and I was horrified. Right?
Yeah.
Right? I was horrified. And what this made
But
me
it's
realize is that, you know, I have stuff to work on. You know, I've been in this
yes,
space for a while. I've been talking about it a long time. But I think that we all do, right? I think that
we
all
all do.
yeah.
Yeah. I actually have a weird bias toward people that have invisible disabilities. It's
Oh,
very
really?
interesting. Yeah,
Okay.
I do. I have to work on that constantly because I tend to favor them in my hiring. And it's like, I just know, even if I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, I just kind of just sense it or something, but I do. There's just certain characteristics that pop off. And I do kind of have that. I also always share the story. I had a few bad candidate experiences, and I developed a very hostile bias towards people named Mallory, and I didn't like them.
Okay. Okay. All right. All
But
right.
that's really how bias works. No, seriously,
Yeah.
that's how simple it can be. Is that it can just be you had a couple of bad experiences, and now your brain goes,
Yeah.
excuse me, your brain just goes, hey, I don't like that. That's bad. I don't want that anymore. Yeah, I don't
Well, you
I
bring
don't
up
like
such
that.
an important point that it's like it's the spur of the moment kind of thing. Like I
Yes.
have to say that the bias most seeps in, like especially in the fast-paced world of recruiting, where they're spending 6 to 10 seconds looking at a resume. That's where you really see the biases creep in. Oh, Catherine.
Oh,
Oh,
that happens.
you went away for a second. Okay.
It just goes circles. Yeah.
That's right. what we see in the fast-paced world of recruiting is that when you're spending 6 to 10 seconds on a resume, those implicit biases really kick in. And it's that moment between putting the resume on the yes stack, the maybe stack, or the no stack.
Yes.
And that moment of hesitation of like, maybe, I'm not quite sure why I'm saying maybe, I'm not quite sure why I'm saying no.
Right.
So I'm just saying no because I only have 6 to 10 seconds to think about it. That's where it really comes in.
Right.
And I think it's also important to point out too that a lot of it might be the way that we were brought up. Like you mentioned some of your upbringing too. And actually something that I share with people personally, which is honestly like one of my most embarrassing moments, but I'm that kind of guy. I try to be as direct and open to people as I can be. But I was at a job fair one day and I was standing and talking to about 250 people that day, probably. Like they were just queued up talking to people the entire day. And there was one gentleman that was hanging around at the job fair the entire time, waiting to talk to me. And finally, he came up and talked to me just as he was packing everything up and everything was closed up. It was my second week on the job at Peak Performers. And he says, hey, so I've heard that people that are recovering from addiction might be eligible for your all services and that's an ADA qualifying condition. I looked at him dead in the face and I said, no, it's not. I know. I'm horrified too. And I get back to the office and I have conversations with my senior management team. They're like, no, that definitely is. I wonder why you're thinking of that. And I had to think about it a lot. And I realized that actually my paternal grandfather had died of alcoholism at the age of like 35. And there's always been that very strong stigma in my family against addiction, against any kind of alcoholism. And I regret that to this day, that I can't go back up to that gentleman and say,
and go, wait, I'm so sorry. Yeah. Oh yeah, we've all had those very teachable moments. Yeah, I've had quite a few in my scenario too, in my life. And I do want to say, so earlier, we said it's very natural to have biases, and it's part of the human experience, but it is your responsibility to work on them, especially if you're in hiring or leadership, and it is your responsibility to not inflict pain on others because of your biases. And you have to kind of realize that. So it's important. And that's how some people end up without jobs, right? Because people don't realize how harmful they're being with this. And then here we go. So I want to talk to you a little bit about how people can how they can go about getting a job when they have disabilities, and not just with your organization, which is obviously wonderful, but what are some of your tips for people in the neurodiverse community and in the disability community, so on and so forth, to be able to gain employment when there is so much bias?
Gosh, we could probably spend 2 hours talking about that, Catherine, but I'll try to give a couple of my quick tips for the job seekers out there. First off, I would like to acknowledge that what you're going through is hard. Honestly is hard for literally anybody to search for a job, because here you are working probably full time, looking for a job, and you're not getting paid for it. It sucks. It's terrible. And to top it all off, you were being told no, sometimes, once a day, sometimes 10 times or 100 times a day, depending on what your job search looks like. So it sucks. The important thing that I would say especially to kind of tackle the folks that are neurodiverse out there is think about what you need to be successful in the job search process. Think about maybe some of the different ways that other people might perceive you, and try to be self-aware as much going into it as possible. So it's important, say, for example, if you do have ADHD and, you are constantly darting around other different places, maybe the perception that the employer might have is that, oh, they're not really interested in talking to me. Okay, so I'm very direct. Again, you kind of gotten that from me right here, but I really like to see, how can I get in front of that and maybe say, hey, so you may have noticed this about me. This is something that I experience. I promise I am paying attention to you, but this is just kind of how I am. And then let's take it from a person with autism, going back to that example of maybe somebody that has trouble making eye contact. Just be aware. Don't try to ignore the elephant in the room. Maybe it's worthwhile to acknowledge that and say, hey, look, I am very interested in what you have to say. I am interested in talking with you. This is just how I am. This is kind of the way that my brain works. And the more that you can acknowledge that and be in front of that, I think that most people that you encounter in this world are going to be kind, they're going to be nice, and they're going to want to do the right thing, and they're going to want to engage with you.
And also, you don't even have to tell them why. You can just say, this is what I do, and that's just it. Now, one of mine that I like to get ahead of a lot, and I even do this when I'm talking to clients, when I'm on podcasts or LinkedIn Lives or whatever. One of mine is I will have facial tics from my seizure disorder, and it'll look like I'm winking at you, and I'm like, okay, just so you know, if that happens, I'm not trying to pick you up for a date. This is this is just what happens sometimes. It's okay. I'm fine. I don't need anything. And people just go, okay, and then they move on, and we go on and so on and so forth. But it's also to help them to know that I'm okay, because sometimes we have things that may seem like we need help. We may have manifestations that may seem like we need help. If you saw somebody whose face just suddenly started doing that, you might go, oh, whoa, my God, are you okay? It might put fear. But if someone tells you, hey, this could happen, it is no big deal. I am not in pain. Then they just go, oh, okay, and you just go on. And I even had one lady, she kind of stopped and giggled when it happened. She goes, it does kind of look like you're trying to get a date with me. And I just kind of laughed. Yeah, well, is what it is, and just kind of owning it. And confidence goes so far any job process.
And that can be hard too. Like, let's be honest, that can be very hard for a lot of job seekers, especially neurodiverse job seekers too. That confidence element can be hard. And that's something that you're going to work on over time. That's something that I always tell people, like, always take the interview, even if it's like, kind of a job that you don't really want to do. Maybe you'll learn something out of it, and maybe you'll be pleasantly surprised. And at the very end of the day, maybe you'll be able to walk away with some of those tips. And the other thing too is, realize that by the time you get a chance to talk to a person face to face or even over the phone, you should be paying attention to the kinds of things that they're asking you, because these are probably going to be asked by other people. So you should be prepared for that. But additionally, you should be prepared for the fact that some people may not ask you and may jump to assumptions, and maybe you can get ahead of those assumptions. Maybe because, they may have those biases that are going on that we talked about, but how can we get in front of those to really kind of just re-steer the conversation and re-steer our perception?
Yeah. Self-advocacy too. Just, advocating for what you need can really be helpful. But let's talk a little bit, because I get asked this a lot, because I am a naturally bold person. So what advice do you have for the people that are more shy, that are more scared because maybe their diagnosis is something that has a stigma around it? For instance, I recently had a conversation with somebody who is in the dissociative identity community. And so there's a lot of misconception around that. So what do you kind of recommend for that?
It really comes down to the trust that you're able to develop with the person that you're interviewing with, the rapport that you have. And I wish that I could say that there's one answer and that the ADA is going to protect you every single time. No, I'm afraid it's not going to. That's hard. That's something that you will have to work on. That's something that is something that you will probably experience barriers in. It might be worthwhile to, again, see if you can try to get in front of it. And I like to be as honest with people as possible. I have had people that have broken down into tears in front of me when talking with me during the interview. And I've told them, hey, look, you're just talking to me, it's fine.
It's okay.
And then they go on and they'll often say, I'm sorry, but I really experience, like, I feel a lot of fear. I feel a lot of trepidation. And so it's oftentimes, if you have a chance to explain yourself and not just let them rush to any assumptions, that can really help. But going back to, like, okay, what if you have something that is genuinely embarrassing? I have worked previously with folks that experience irritable bowel syndrome, right? And now think of, like, there's nothing that I can imagine worse than it's my first day on the job. Great, nice to meet you, brand new boss. By the way, I have IBS. Can I have a desk that's a little closer to the bathroom? Right. So it's really hard. It all comes down to the personal rapport that you're able to develop with people. And sometimes, like you said, sometimes you don't have to even say why. You just have to say, due to personal reasons, I would really appreciate if I'm able to get this.
XYZ.
Yeah. The biggest thing that you can do, going back to self-advocacy, is have a solution in mind that you're ready to hand to them and say, hey, Catherine, here's what I propose. Here's what I would love to do. The accommodation process, we tend to make it really, really complex in our mind, but it's doesn't have to be, right?
It doesn't. No.
Yeah.
God, no. I'm always talking about make accommodations, standard options for the most part. Now, there are some that are a little bit more complex, and I understand having a process for that, but most of them should just be standard options.
Yeah.
Most of them. It's not that complicated. And most are cheap or free and typically very simple.
So I did a little research for this, actually. Would you want to know how many, what percent of them are actually free and no cost accommodations? 59% of them are actually no cost to the employer whatsoever. And the vast majority of them that do cost something, it's usually a one-time cost. So it's something that's really, really pretty small when you think about it. Some of the most common accommodations, well, first off, the most common accommodation that we employees is the ability to take time off with little to no notice. Because if you're having a mental health crisis, it's probably not a great idea for you to go to work, and that's probably going to be difficult for you to explain to your employer, right? So that's the number one thing that we get.
Like, hello, my mind is broken today. Like, how does that
go? Yeah, I know, right? That's like
I'm broke. I can't do it today anymore. And by the way, where did you get your statistic, by the way? That's my rule. Cite a stat. You gotta say where it's from.
I got to say where it's from, right? Yeah, this was actually from an Accenture study. So Accenture looked at a couple of different things. What they were looking at is they were looking at companies that were pegged as being more inclusive versus ones that were less inclusive. A couple other fun tidbits. They also found that companies that were disability champions were produced twice as much income and had 28% more revenue. So I can provide links for all that after the fact.
See, this is what I'm always preaching. This is what I always tell people. It increases your revenue, and it's for very practical reasons when you break it down about, in understanding the customer base more and more innovation, and people are more comfortable, and the mind works better and the body works better when it's more comfortable and allowed to function naturally. And so it just makes sense. Plus, people are happier when they're healthier, and that makes a big difference.
Well, and you're missing actually even the biggest business use case. Well, before we talk too much about the business use case, because I always feel weird about talking about this a little bit, because I'm like, it's the right thing to do. We all need to
I know. Like, why do we have to make a business case? But we do have to. We do have to do it all the time in our work. And when you're in inclusion and all of that, and I'm sorry if anybody can hear that. My husband has suddenly decided to go do pool work, like right outside of my window. But so yeah, it's just one of those things. We do have to make a business case all the time. So it sounds awful, but it really doesn't matter. It does.
It's sad that the onus is on us, but it is. So, like, okay, let's talk numbers. All right. So there's currently the average vacancy rate last time I checked was around 7.5% for companies. If you are working with government, like I do a lot, oftentimes the vacancy rate is more around 20 to 30%. That's a whole lot of stuff that's not getting done. And that's a whole lot of people that are leaving your organization because they are stressed out and they are donezo. Okay, so currently there are 10.9 million people in the US that have a disability between the ages of 16 and 64, and currently they experience an unemployment rate that is double that in the national average, which is an undercount. The official numbers from Office of Disability Employment Policy is that they experience a participation rate in the labor force of 23.9%. That means that there's a whole lot of talent out there that has a disability that you should be employing if you need to fill your jobs.
That's right. And well, let's be clear too, because some people get confused with this terminology. So participation does not mean that they're not trying to get a job. Okay. That's not what that means. That just means that's who's actually got a job and who's doing well. So that means there's a ton of people out there. They're actively trying to get jobs. And that are perfectly capable human beings. My mother, for instance, my father has invisible disabilities. My mother has very visible. She has terrible rheumatoid arthritis. And up until very recently, she worked highly effectively as an upper level executive for a hospital system in Texas in the HR field and department. And it was so funny because she would walk into a room with her cute little pink walker, and she's just going along and she can barely hold a pen, but then she opens her mouth and just brilliance comes out of it. And she's, fierce and strong and all this. And it would always surprise people. And it was so funny because she would get comments. People would say, I forget that you're disabled. Like they would literally, even though she's going around with this walker.
You are such an inspiration to us all. And I go,
Oh,
okay.
yeah, these are things that none of us want to hear. Okay,
Right.
please stop.
You are an inspiration for existing and being good at your job. Like, okay,
No,
let's
no, I'm
back
not.
it up
And
there a little bit. How about just
uh,
you're good at your job? That's pretty cool.
yeah, period. End of story. Like, good God. That's what I tell people. I'm like, no, and I'm not successful in spite of my diagnoses. That also gets on my nerves. No, I can't like take them off, put them in a little sack and like put them over and they're just kind of bothering trying to get out all the time. Like, no, that's not how that works. You
Yeah.
know, I am successful with my diagnoses. In some case, they can actually be helpful. Some of the neurodiversities can actually be helpful. The physical ones, not so much. They just kind of suck, but they don't necessarily hurt the situation, depending on it. But yeah, it's just part of your life. You know, people are so weird about it. They make this huge, and everybody who has a diagnosis is a hero. I'm like, no, we're not here. No, stop saying that. It's very annoying.
Just
One of my
normal people.
favorite people on YouTube and Instagram, Shane Burkow, talks about that. He's like, no, I'm not an inspiration because I have SMA. I'm inspiring maybe because of the work I do. Maybe that's a thing, but
Sure,
I'm not.
that's valid. That's valid. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's incredible. Like he's really done some cool work. Getting people more accessibility equipment, stuff like that.
So, Catherine, I wanted to turn it back around on you, actually. What are some of the things that you hear from employers that maybe want to hire people with disabilities, but what's kind of keeping them from doing so? Or like, what are you hearing?
So fear of cost of accommodation is
Mm.
and complications. I think it's gonna be like super challenging to deal with this, and it's just really not. I've led a lot of teams with a lot of different disabilities. It takes like no time. I've spoken to dozens upon dozens of leaders across the country that do that. They all say the same thing. There's little to no time involved in it on a regular basis, but cost and that. Also, they seem to think it's going to cost more to hire them.
Interesting.
And the thought behind that is I need to go to certain tools or I need to use certain platforms, and so they seem to think it's going to cost more, but that's not completely true. I don't really know where that. It's not that it. I mean, you could spend money on extra tools, but you do not have to. You absolutely do not have to. In other words, to find the candidates, you don't
Right.
necessarily have to find the candidates. Also, a lot of assuming that they can't do the job as well.
Yeah. There's a lot of assumptions out there.
There's a lot of that, a lot. And then the last one, and this one is kind of funny to me, is they'll go, well, there's just not that many people with disabilities out there.
Well, it's only 26% of the United States, so
I mean, that's not that many, right? It's like millions of people, whatever.
Whew. Yeah. Oh man, there's a lot to unpack right there with those. So first off, what I would say is that no, it doesn't cost anything more. And people oftentimes will ask me, "Hey, where do you go to actually find people with disabilities? Where do you recruit them?" And I go, "You don't go anywhere special. They are literally out there." They're like, "Do you go to a particular job board?" Well, there are particular job boards for people with disabilities, but most of the time they're applying through LinkedIn, they're applying through Indeed, the same places that everywhere else goes. So it's about making your policies more inclusive. It's about making your hiring process more inclusive. It's about making people feel welcome throughout the process, which is an important consideration because,
Yes.
if somebody were to come to your home, you want them to feel welcome. If somebody comes to your business, you want them to feel welcome. And part of that is sometimes figuring out how to be adaptable and flexible. When I talk to people with disabilities, they say it's all about adaptiveness and being
Yep.
flexible. So
Yep.
you should return the darn favor.
Right. Yes. Just be flexible. Just be, and I think it's makes more sense to me because I'm Southern and I was raised by like a Southern family who's like, we must host parties and everyone must have an awesome time. And so I was raised to accommodate humans, just raised that that's what you ought to do. Just be thoughtful and mindful and all this. And so it was literally ingrained in me from the time I was a small child. So that part of all of this came very naturally.
But a lot of employers approach it where they're like, I have to grill them. I have to like put them, I have to churn them through and, test them by fire to see if
No.
they're made for, they have what it takes for my organization.
No.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of problems with that.
Yeah,
Besides
so
just people
many.
with disabilities, you need to really rethink that strategy right there,
Just
right?
a touch. Another one too that will not make people feel very welcome in your place of business. And this is my favorite. This is a new thing, and I actually think, sadly, that it's a misguided attempt to inclusion. I really
Yeah.
do. I'm
Okay.
going to give benefit of the doubt here,
Okay.
and we're going to assume that. Okay. So on the application process, do not ask people what their disability is.
Yeah.
Do not
Okay.
ask them what their sexuality is. Do not ask them, are they a caretaker for a disabled loved one?
Yeah.
That's very nosy and
You're
very
really
rude.
yourself up quite a bit. Yeah.
And also
Well,
illegal. Let's just throw that on out there.
yeah.
That you are leaving yourself wide open to a discrimination case and a lawsuit and a bunch of other things. So please, please do not do that. And it makes people feel, and I've also seen a lot of people that are just not paying attention to their HR technology. And
Yeah.
so what's happening is they're having the exact same survey 3 or 4 times, but just in different ways. And
Okay.
so it's supposed to be like the EEOC and ADA stuff and all that we're all used to seeing, right?
Yeah.
But instead, it's happening over and over, so it seems targeting. Like, well, why are you asking me this 4 different times, 4 different ways? Like,
Yeah.
what is that? That's very weird. Like, why are you doing that? And I've talked to a lot of people that say, in a lot of different communities, that say, I stop right there, I back out, and I go. And
Yeah.
I've talked to people across different races, different religions, different abilities, disabled, and neurodiversities, things like that. I've spoken to people who are veterans, things like that, and people go, I honestly, and it was, oh gosh, I'm gonna have to look at my study. It was over 80%. I know that. It was somewhere in the 80s
Okay.
of percent of these people said, I will back out of an application.
Okay.
And
Wow.
in the and without the vets, if you take the vets out of that, it was over 95%. It was like
Yeah.
just over. It was like 95.4 or something like that percent said that they will back out if they see those multiple questions. Like, ooh, that's creepy. So then you just got a bunch of like white able-bodied people. Not that there's anything wrong
I
with
get why
white
you're backing
able-bodied
out
people.
too. Yeah, you're asking
Yeah,
some of the most intimate details about us in such
that's
in a
weird.
checkbox, and I'm not a checkbox. That's
No,
not who I am.
no.
So a little bit of perspective on like how Peak does it, because everybody asked us like, how do you get this information, right?
Yeah,
Well, the recruiters build trust with a person, they have a conversation with a person, and then they ask them to identify as a person with a disability or without a disability. And it's simply a binary thing. And the reason that
right.
it's legally compliant for us is because we ask every single human being that we talk to. And so it's consistently applied. And consistency is kind of the key word in HR. Like you have to be
Yes,
consistent on everything.
yes, you
And
do.
then later on down the road, we will ask for medical verification as part of our nonprofit mission. And
Right.
when we get audited, that's the kind of thing that wants to be visible to
Yes.
the outside auditors as well.
And I
But
want to be clear, that's only
don't do it
acceptable
on a
because they're a
checkbox.
nonprofit. Like real quick,
Okay?
I just want to throw that out there. That is only acceptable because they're
Yes.
a
Yes,
nonprofit.
it's a very different process for us because we
Mm-hmm.
have things that are very built around that. But I guess that should be what would you recommend to an HR professional just working at any
Oh,
company right now? How would you
um,
recommend the self-disclosure?
collect it anonymously
Yeah.
and make it all optional. That's what I do. And
Yeah.
and do it before hire, and you can even do it once after hire, like 60 days in. Say, hey, if you're now comfortable, yada yada. But always anonymously, and do not associate it with a profile or anything like that. It just needs to be completely just random data that comes to you. That's a far more effective way. So as we wrap up, and thank you
Yeah.
so very much for joining me today. It's been an absolute delight having you. It's one of my favorite topics. So can you tell everyone a little bit more about how to get involved with peak performers if they want to volunteer, if they want to send you candidates, if they want to be a candidate?
Yeah.
What do we do?
Well, so if you are a job seeker, you can find all of our jobs at peakperformers.org, and I encourage you to apply. There's two different options that you can do. The first is you can apply for a specific job if you see an opportunity that comes along that's a really good fit for you and your particular skill set. You likely, if you are a person with a disability, you'll be competing against other people who also have disabilities for that particular job right there, which is kind of the beauty of it, right? It's a normal employment kind of situation. However, if you don't see a job that's a perfect fit on there, but you heard me say accountant, and I'm an accountant, but I don't see anything that's a perfect fit right now, that's okay. On our website, click the pink button that says quick apply. You can upload a copy of your resume for general consideration. And that way we are considering you for multiple different opportunities at the same time. And we'll have a recruiter reach out to have a further conversation with you. So if you are a community partner and you are interested in interfacing with peak performers, and you're interested in sending over people that you know that have a disability to us, I'm your guy. I'm happy to chat with you a little bit further. We can hop on a quick phone call, go over what Peak Performers is all about, and how we can work with you. And thank you, first off.
Yes,
because,
and yay!
You account for half of all the people that work for us right now, which is a really important number. It takes a lot of courage for people to disclose something like disability. And so we really value you trusting us and sending over candidates in that regard. And finally, if you are a business, I'm here to help connect you to the business folks. You can find more information on our website under the hire staff page. But the thing that I would have you know is that we support temporary to permanent and direct hire permanent placement opportunities. So whatever your particular recruiting needs and staffing needs are, whether it's project-based or full-time equivalents within your organization, we can help provide those personnel. And again, at the very least, even if Peak Performance is not a fit for your service, we'd love to maybe do some corporate trainings with you. I'd love to chat with you and your team and maybe overcome some of those biases, overcome some of those challenges, answer some of those questions that you've always been afraid to ask.
Speaking of, and yes, and please talk to them, because sometimes people are afraid to ask these questions. I'm all about it. Like, contact either one of us. We'd be very happy to help you out. For some things, I definitely defer to you guys as well. So Lindsay has asked here, what about those personality behavior assessments? Is that discriminatory? Am I getting rolled out somehow?
Good to see
you.
Hi,
Lindsay. Hi.
So Lindsay, the personality behavior assessment tests, I don't like them. I think that they're really bad in many circumstances. I actually asked my HR leaders a little while back if they were discriminatory, and they all gave me this long. So, like the sudden intake of breath, and I think that the room emptied out of oxygen for a second. Needless to say, and I actually had a friend recently that applied for a position, and he was taking a personality test and an IQ test as part of that application. And even if it's not, I'm not 100% sure if it is black and white discriminatory kind of thing, I would still walk away.
First of all, rude. Second of all, so Lindsay, I will tell you, I love to go to tech conventions. I as part of what I do, and I always go up to every single one of these that I can find, because one of the first things that I ask them is, I say, how are you making sure that you're inclusive? And they always talk about, oh, well, we don't use this language. I'm like, and what about how somebody's brain processes? And what about how this question's asked? And what about this and this? And they just stand there dumbfounded. And and I've spoken not only to salespeople, but the people who actually designed the thing. And they're flabbergasted every single time. I only had one that even knew what neurodiversity was. I spoke to that was a designer. Now, there were some other people that knew other places in the organization, but on the designing side. And I'm like, how is it that you made a platform that everybody's going to have to use, and you didn't even consider a third of the population?
Mm-hmm.
And not to mention physical ability too, because sometimes there's certain visual elements. There can be, again, seizure things there, because some of them actually have quick moving features. And I'm like, hello, that can cause seizures very clearly. And so to be honest with you, Lindsay, I have yet to find one that I find to be truly inclusive. Mm-hmm. I have seen some great assessments that are post-hire that help a company learn how to best communicate with you, how you best learn. Some of those, not all. A few of those I've seen are truly wonderful. They actually are very inclusive. They promote inclusivity. They promote working with you wherever you're at. It's great for the disability community sometimes too, because it can identify different types of accommodations, that type of thing that would be helpful. But in terms of the the behavior assessments. First of all, they're unnecessary. Learn how to interview. Second of all, it's a very blunt feedback from someone who teaches recruiting and has taught it over and over again and done it for many years. And then also, yes, they are absolutely discriminatory. I have yet to find one. And if anybody out there wants to challenge that and send me your platform, I'm always happy to look and do a correction and post good things about you. I've done it in the past when somebody proved me wrong. So, but absolutely, I would say so. So thank you, Lindsay, for that. Thank you so very much, Myles, for joining me. Everybody visit Peak Performers. I'm a huge fan. Contact them to get candidates. Contact them if you are a candidate. Contact them if you need services. They can help connect you to different services, and contact them if you want to refer candidates to them. I think they're spectacular. I've already made a lot of connections for them, and I'll be sending them more candidates in the future. Highly, highly, highly recommend them. And again, thank you, Myles. Oh, and last time, tell everybody how to find you.
Oh, absolutely. So you can find us, you can just Google Peak Performers, or you can go to peakperformers.org. You can find me. My first name is Myles, spelled Myles, Wallace, Wallace, for folks that might be using a screen reader right now, or not be able to see the screen. But you can connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to be a resource for you to connect you into Peak Performers. Again, whether that's that you're looking for a job or whether you're looking to hire people, I'm here to help be that bridge into Peak.
I love that. And thank you again for joining me. Everybody tune in tomorrow morning to Career Launch Live. We are back for season 4. I will have Kay Suthar with me. Definitely check us out. See you tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern. Be great tonight.